Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is all the way back in 1945 and Rome Open City, written and directed by Roberto Rossellini, co-written by Fellini. This is part of the BFI's War Trilogy, Rossellini. We also get Pisa and Germany Year Zero. So this is a film made in 1945, set in 1944 during the Nazi occupation of Rome. And this is a film that is sort of a mix of different styles and genres. It's one of the great early neo-realist films, even though it's more realism than neo-realism. But it also kind of works as a film noir, and certainly the lighting in a lot of scenes is very reminiscent of film noir. It's also a resistance film, but it also focuses on ordinary people living day to day, trying to get food and things like that, living in obviously difficult conditions. But it's also a film that you have to keep reminding yourself it was made in 1945, because this is actually pretty brutal. It has a 70s ending, but it's really got a obviously World War II ending. It doesn't shy away from the brutal truth of World War II life under occupation, life resisting. But it's still amazing that it got away with some of the stuff that's actually in the film. Because again, you do have to keep reminding yourself, this is made in 1945, right? Because if this was an American film, because of the Hays Code, there's no way that Rossellini would get away with the stuff that he gets away with in here. So the basic premise, it's not really that plot heavy. It's basically the story of somebody in the resistance who, with the help of a priest, is trying to get out of the situation that he's in, and he meets several characters along the way. A widow and her son, his girlfriend who is a showgirl. It's fascinating because I didn't think the film would be about drug addiction, but she has an addiction problem, so it goes into that as well. It does kind of go into interesting little areas that sometimes World War II resistance films don't really go into. And again, it speaks to their crowded living conditions. We have a focus on two of the kind of main villains, and I would say one of the weaknesses of the film is perhaps that the two villains are fairly cartoonish. You could argue that the World War II films of Powell and Pressburger are a little bit more nuanced when it comes to the Nazis or the Germans. And, it's understandable. One of the things in Come and See is perhaps the Germans are over-exaggerated, but again, it's perfectly understandable when it's a film about your people in your country. And obviously the Germans were terrible. I'm not trying to say that's not the case. But we have a German major played by Harry Feist, whether that was actually his real name or not, and he is quite a striking looking character. He has all the mannerisms of a kind of quintessential sadistic Nazi, and then he has a woman who gets information from the central character's girlfriend, who again has the addiction problem, but also likes nice things and is very material and wants possessions, even during the war. And it's obvious that this henchwoman, if you like, is a lesbian. And yes, the portrayal of this isn't, oh, let's have a strong lesbian character in the film. This is about, oh, look how depraved the Nazis are, because they have these behaviours. And the woman that plays the henchwoman, Giovanna Giletti, she is striking as well. I don't know whether she was an influence on Cruella de Vil in the 101 Dalmatians, but she has a very striking look. So both her and the Nazi major are fairly broad, scary looking characters. And again, that's absolutely fair. But it's perhaps a little bit cartoonish, but I mean, that's like a minor gripe. Again, the film is amazingly brutal, doesn't shy away from the brutality of the situation and the world. Lambs, obviously symbolic, are brought into a restaurant by a couple of German soldiers, and the restaurant owner says, this is a restaurant, I'm not a butcher. And the soldiers say, it's okay, we'll take care of the butchering. And obviously the restaurant owner says, yes, you're good at that. And then we see them pretty much shooting the lambs in the head out the back. It is a film that does actually have some humour to it, but again, it's real humour. It's not kind of broad, unnatural humour. We see firing squads, but with the victim's back to the firing squad, which you don't see a lot in films. And then we do see people being shot in the head at point blank range. There's a torture scene that is really explicit, and again, you keep looking at the back of the box to say, this was made in 1945, wasn't it? Because the torture scene is fairly brutal, because they almost go full Pulp Fiction with pliers and a blowtorch. So it is actually quite a startling film. There's no kind of, again, you can tell this is a European film and not an American film. There's no kind of heroics really. This is about people trying to survive, and the nobility of not naming names and not being a collaborator. We don't really see much reward in that. And on the other side, the people who do collaborate, it's okay to collaborate, and you don't see the results or the consequences of your actions. But when you're actually brought face to face with the consequences of your actions, that can be the reality sets in and somebody faints when they're faced with that. And then in a lovely touch, the Cruella de Vil character goes over to this person who's fainted, but instead of helping them, she literally just picks the fur coat off her back and walks away, which I just think is a beautiful touch. And again, there's also a kind of German captain who, during a drinking session, is very philosophical about the state of the Third Reich, and we've left corpses all over Europe, and all we produce is more hatred. So there's lots of, so that character at least gives you some kind of nuanced performance or nuanced aspect of the Germans. I mean, we do see an Austrian Nazi officer who deserts and with the help of the priest potentially gets away as well. So there is nuance within the film. It's just the main two villains of the piece are, maybe just because of they have very startling features, they do kind of stand out, and especially the captain has lots of kind of mannerisms that are very theatrical. And again, I don't know whether it would have been slightly better to have slightly more nuanced characters. But again, it's not really, it is a quibble rather than like a fault in the film. The film is really impressive. Again, even amongst the neo-realism, Rossellini does have an eye for really strong compositions. And the final kind of frames of the film are from a child's perspective of an atrocity, and then walking away from that atrocity into the future, whatever that future will be. Whereas in 1944, under occupation, there maybe wasn't much of a future to look forward to. The film reminded me of The Third Man, and then again you realise The Third Man was made in 1949, so this was probably perhaps an influence on the look of The Third Man, as far as bombed out Rome and walking through rubble. There's still buildings smouldering in the background. It's you are grounded in the reality. This isn't a studio, there's no process shots. The famous scene in the film, or one of the famous scenes in the film, is very realistic and in your face. Like I say, it's a startlingly brutal film that you just don't expect some of the things you see. But again, that just brings the audience to the fact that this stuff happened, and worse things happened. Before the torture, the captain says to the priest, I'll make him suffer in ways you can't imagine. And the priest's like, well, my imagination's actually quite good. So it's just a really impressive piece of work. Hugely influential. Really good performances. A pair of interesting villains. And really stunningly photographed, with a real eye for composition, and it's pretty fantastic. So that's Rome Open City from 1945, part of this BFI War Trilogy by Rossellini. Please let me know in the comments below if you've seen Rome Open City and what you thought of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.